This is a Glastonbury romance. Sam watched him gloomily. The man seemed to be worshipping fire. Sam took his great fist from the mantelpiece and stepped back a pace or two. Damn the fellow! That it had been such a hot, dusty, sort of nondescript, unpleasant day made the fact of there being a fire at all in that room a grotesque thing. The chap had seemed to be melting into the twilight outside the window, and now he seemed to be on the point of diving into the flame. He raised his hand to his chin. She said, I had the look of a saint, he thought to himself. And then there came over him the realization that tonight Zoyland was really off, piloted by Barter or some London crony of Barter's, to Wookey Hole. Everybody in Glastonbury knew it. Everybody in Glastonbury knew that Nell was all alone on Queen Sedgemoor. I could bear it, he thought, if she'd never leant against me with her breasts. Who could bear that and not want to possess, and not have to possess? The wild idea came surging into his head that he would wait till his father and Penny were asleep, and then let himself out of the house and hurry over there, even if it were the middle of the night, even if he didn't get there till dawn. Well, Crow, I've got to be off, he said. I'm late as it is. Thanks awfully for the tea. God knows I'll be able to drink any more. We'll go out and with this another time. The demon by the fire leapt to its feet and became once more the drooping, feeble, nervous beneficiary of the bounty of Mr. Geard. Goodbye, he said, and don't forget to tell your father that I want to see him about the midsummer fair. The only person who won't like our fair will be my precious cousin, and I can promise him we're going to give him a reason for not liking it. We're going to larn him, as we say in Norfolk, to turn Glastonbury into a factory town. We're going to shake up his capitalistic complacency. You'll see. Well, goodbye, Decker, and don't forget to freeze like a hare and let chance and destiny fight it out for themselves. While father and son were slowly gravitating back to Silver Street, snug in the vicarage kitchen sat Penny Pitches and Mr. Weatherwax. If Penny was all body, and a very square body at that, Weatherwax was all face. He was like one of those absurd political caricatures that represent some familiar physiognomy, enlarged to monstrous size and unnaturally balanced upon a mannequin's frame. The face of Isaac Weatherwax was a large, flat, sunburned expanse, like an ancient map of some terra incognita. Arranged at traditional distances in this expanse were eyes and nose and mouth. There were also various excrescences of a less usual kind, mountains, one might say, in this sun-scorched moon, to which Mr. Weatherwax was wont sometimes to refer as, these here bug-uncles were to grow out of my cheeks. All the preparations for the vicarage high tea were waiting the return of the old and the young master. But meanwhile, the two ancient gossips, as if a square were entering a circle, were enjoying themselves well enough, independent of the teapot. Mr. Weatherwax was tasting in advance a bottle of cognate, so that whenever the Abbey House sideboard should be debtor again to the vicarage cellar, there should be no abrupt or disconcerting change of the nature of the loan. So, us to be going to have a new mayor, come election day, among them councilmen, remarked Mr. Weatherwax dreamily. All of we work folks will be requested by some, as we do know, to nudge they can councilmen and stir 'em up. 'Tis said by some, as we do know, that Mr. Wallop and Mr. Crow be out to turn out quite town into a girt city borough by increasing the population. But whatever they says, my gal, I hold my authority. I hold by Mr. Crow. 'Tis said this here Gerd, a man no different than I, a man who can pray high and drink deep like any common man, will be for letting visitors in and keeping hindustry out. But I holds with Mr. Crow in his hindustries. Do ye want to know, my gal, how I holds with ye? Will they have a taste of me gorlas, Isaac? Interrupted Penny. 'Tis better than usual today. Mr. Weatherwax permitted a faint sign of affirmation to flicker across his political gravity, while Penny rose from her chair. She proceeded to make some rapid changes in the relative position of pots and the lids of pots upon her great stove whilst her visitor finished the brandy. This flat expanse of rusty iron surface, with its many round-lidded apertures, was Penny's coliseum of encounters with brewed matter. It was an older stove than that used by M.S. Sly up on the Elms, and it was handled in a more primitive manner. The elm stove was always kept well blacked. Like Louis's stove at the Abbey House, it possessed polished knobs and shining ornamentations, whereas the vicarage stove might have been the stove of a tribe of gypsies. All sorts of things could be spilt on it. Penny didn't care. Penny was as sylvan in her ways as if she had been the savage man on the Fairy Queen, fresh from some primordial Arcadia. At the back of her stove, there rested a large simmering cauldron that she used for making a particular kind of broth. This cauldron was literally never empty. It was like the cauldron of the head of Hades in the poetry of Taliesin. Penny had a name of her own for this perennial brew of hers. She called it Gorlas. Whether this extraordinary word had come down to her in some way, very old Glastonbury tradition, it was really a corruption of the word Gorslasser, which seems to have meant a dark blue, livid color, and was used to describe a mysterious corpse god, or Reximmer Mortis, in the old Cymric mythology, is a question that Penny, less lucky in her introductions to learned men than Abel Twig, had never had a chance of referring to the curator of the museum. "Do we know, Penny," said Mr. Weatherwax as he partook of his friend's brew, "what be the pivot of life upon earth?" Penny smiled the smile of an old woman, of all women, and all philosophy, but she shook her head obediently. "Well, me good soul," Mr. Weatherwax continued, "I be the one what be telling thee what thick about it, the thick thing be. Thick thing be authority. When I see true living authority, I know vegetables grow, and hens lay, and cattle breed, and poor folk be fed and clothed." His voice sank into a low, confidential whisper. "There'll be only one true living authority in our town, and that authority be Mr. Crow. If so be as your silly woman and your fly-by-night preachers do turn our town from serving Mr. Crow to serving idols, then I says, look well to it. The end of all things be at hand." His voice ceased. He lifted up the bowl of Gorlas to his capacious mouth and leered tipsily over its brim. "Folks be queerer than ye mold world bachelors do Mindy," retorted Penny enigmatically. "Folks would rather brew their own broth themselves than be fed with all the milk of paradise." And now a paragraph break. When Sam returned to his father's house, it had grown quite dark. He heard old Weatherwax muttering tipsily as he shuffled down the back drive, and he himself, to avoid the gardener, moved on to the front drive gate. He felt so disturbed in his thoughts that when he laid his hand on the handle of the great iron gate, it came over him that it was almost impossible to face his father. Heavily and slowly he drifted on a little way further up the road. He soon came to the end of Silver Street, and wavering there a moment, finally turned to his right and followed the outside eastern wall of the Abbey grounds down the ancient road leading to the tor that bears the historic, buck-infused name of Chilkwell Street. When he reached the turning into Bear Lane, he saw before him the vast Gothic shape, rising rich and dim in the darkness, of the greatest abbey barn in England. This edifice is still used as an ordinary farm barn, but Sam knew every lineament of its facade so well that through the darkness, as he now approached it, the four mystic creatures of the evangelist that protect its rampart seemed to murmur at him and signal to him. Oof. Sam scowled, gloomily back at these apocalyptic beings. They had watched so many huge wagon loads of hay, of straw, of oats, of wheat, of barley, so many litters of pigs, so many cartloads of turnips and mangels, being carried under this Gothic archway, that they seemed to call upon Sam also to bring them something, to bring them anything. But Sam had only one offering in his heart just then, and that offering he felt he could not offer. Sullenly and heavily he dragged himself a little further along Chilkwick Street, till on his left hand he saw that stone walls of Chalice House, at that time completely unoccupied, and on his right the lighted windows of St. Michael's Inn. Both these buildings were still many hundreds of yards away, and the paved footpath he was following was raised about 6 feet above the level of the road. There were a few small stone houses here abutting upon the footpaths, and, behind these, several small garden paths. These paths, extending between low mossy walls, led up to the lower slope of Chalice Hill. Sam was unfamiliar with the far-rumored version of the Grail story, which place is the enchanted castle of Carbonek. That's the name of this chapter, by the way. Where the mystery was guarded upon the summit of Chalice Hill. And he now turned his abundant gaze as one by one these dark accents between the shadowy lines of masonry came into the scope upon the hill's higher reaches as if it had been any ordinary upland. At the base of one of these accents, however, he was suddenly arrested by the sight of a dusky figure leaning against a low wall. The manner in which the outlines of the figure resolved themselves into what surrounded it, into the soil, into the stones, into the stone crop, into the darkness, enabled Sam, though he had the eyes neither of a Rembrandt nor a Hardy, to recognize it for that of a woman. His poor head was so full of one particular woman that it was natural enough that his first thought was, "She has come to me." But he soon realized that the figure was that of a lean, ungainly person, as totally unlike his Nell as a raven is unlike a dove. And then came vaguely over him that he had seen this person before, and not very long ago either. Who the devil did she make him think of? He stared sullenly and gloomily at this solitary, motionless form, till at last it began to strike his mind that whoever it was someone who had no wish to be watched. Then he knew in a flash who it was. It was Cordelia Gurd. Simultaneously with this knowledge, it came over him that Cordelia had been seated by the side of that queer-looking devil from old Jones's shop when he met her in that funny Gurd room. So that was it. She was waiting for that fellow now. They were keeping company, and he left her for a minute for some reason, probably to relieve nature. They were no doubt prowling around the environs of Chalice House. Her father had very likely been buying up these little cottages. The shock of seeing Cordelia, when he was so little expected it, pulled his wits together with a jerk. God, how selfish of me to keep old Dad waiting for so long. I must get back at once. He disappeared, and Cordelia, who had been watching him from above, far more intently and nervously than he had been watching her, breathed a sigh of relief. She was alone again. Shall I go on, she thought, or go back? Crummy wants me. Mother wants me. Dad will be fussing about me. If Mr. Evans comes and I'm out, he'll think my feelings were hurt by the way he acted this morning. Oh, let them all want me. I've been considerate to everyone's too long. I've thought of everybody except myself too long. She looked round, pondering. No, I don't care if they do want me. And she turned resolutely to the dark hillside above her. I don't care if they do have to wait for me. I don't care if I never see any of them again. If I never go back down there ever again. She began rapidly ascending the hill. The air seemed to grow fresher as she advanced. What a dusty, colorless, neutral day it had been. What the blue twilight had been strange. And what queer vapors, though there was nothing damp in the air, had kept gathering, separating, rolling away in confused retreat, over the banks of the Brew and over the gardens of Street Road. It had been partly the strange twilight that had lured her forth, that and this new restlessness in her blood. This slope of Chalice Hill had been one of her favorite resorts. When her bad moods were upon her, she always went off alone to one of these other of such places. It's one of my resorts, she would have said if Crummy had questioned her. In every little town in England, there are probably several eccentric women who habitually break loose from their family and realize their innermost selves by excursions to certain particular spots. Such people often end by becoming half crazy. Sometimes they end by committing suicide. But it is without question that in the interim between their slavery to their family and this madness of this, or the suicide, as they visit these favorite resorts and carry there their inhuman, contra-human thoughts, they experience raptures of a dark, strange quality such as so-called contented people may go through a whole life and never know. There can hardly be a village. What a destiny these lonely resorts of these lonely people come to know. There can hardly be a village in England, or a small town in England. The great cities are great, of course, drown all such things by the washing of their huge tides of humanity, where there are not certain isolated spots loaded with the wild thoughts of these solitary ones. They have a fate like Io, the heifer maid, these women, driven mad by the gadfly of Hera. Every one of them is a prophetess, a companion of Prometheus. Every one of them has been spiritually ravished by the great, unmerciful father of all lies. How those lovely spots must be impregnated with these women's rebellious imaginations. How they must carry these strange, rapturous thought children, watered by floods and deluges, of releasing, melting, dissolving, obliterating tears, and leave them there to be nourished by the mother of us all. And we'll leave there with Cordelia at her isolated spot, cursing her fate, until we return to the Glastonbury Romance next time. Till then, cheers.